It was a cold night in 1944. The streets of Harlem were silent, but inside one small cafe, a teenage girl sat alone, watching the door, waiting for the enemy. Her red hair caught the lamplight. Her hands rested calmly on the table. Beneath her coat, she carried a weapon. Across the room, German officers laughed and drank. They had no idea who she was. They had no idea what she had done. Welcome to Untold Dawn, where we uncover the hidden stories history tried to forget. Her name was Hannie Schaft. Before the war, she was nobody special. Just another student with dreams of becoming a lawyer. She studied at the University of Amsterdam, walked the same cobbled streets as thousands of others, attended lectures, worried about exams. She was bright, curious, and kind. She had friends from all walks of life. Some of them were Jewish. In those early days, that detail meant nothing. Friendship was friendship, trust was trust. The world had not yet learned to divide itself so savagely. But then came May 1940. The Netherlands had hoped to remain neutral, as it had in the First World War. Those hopes died in a matter of days. German forces invaded with overwhelming speed. Bombers tore through the sky above Rotterdam, reducing the city center to rubble and ash. Hundreds of civilians were killed in minutes. The Dutch military, outnumbered and outgunned, could do little to stop the advance. Within 5 days, the country had fallen. Queen Wilhelmina fled to London. The government followed, and the occupation began. At first, life seemed to continue. The Germans were efficient, organized, almost polite. They assured the Dutch people that cooperation would bring stability. Many believed them. Many wanted to believe them. Hannie Schaft was not among them. She watched carefully. She noticed the small changes first. New laws, new restrictions, Jewish families forced to register, Jewish students barred from universities, Jewish shops marked with symbols. Her friends, the ones she had studied with, laughed with, trusted, were being separated from society piece by piece. She could not look away. While others chose comfort, she chose clarity. While others turned blind eyes, she opened hers wider. When her Jewish friends were expelled from the university, she made a choice. She would not stay silent. She would not pretend everything was normal. She walked away from her studies, her future, her safety. She walked toward the resistance. Joining the Dutch underground was not a grand ceremony. There were no speeches, no anthems, no banners. It was quiet. It was careful. It was dangerous. Hannie found her way into the Raad van Verzet, the Council of Resistance, a network of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. They forged documents. They hid Jewish families. They gathered intelligence. They sabotaged German operations. And when necessary, they killed. Hannie was 19 years old. She had never held a gun. She had never taken a life. But she learned quickly. The resistance needed people who could think clearly under pressure. They needed people who could blend in, who could move unnoticed through a city crawling with soldiers and informants. Hannie was perfect for the work. She was young, soft-spoken, unassuming. She looked harmless. That was her greatest weapon. Her first missions were simple: carrying messages, delivering false papers, moving supplies from one safe house to another. She rode her bicycle through the streets with contraband hidden beneath her coat, her heartbeat steady, her face calm. She learned to read the streets, to sense danger before it appeared. She learned who to trust and who to avoid. She learned that in wartime, innocence was the best disguise. But the work grew heavier. The resistance needed more than couriers. They needed operatives who could strike back. The occupation was tightening. Jewish families were being rounded up, deported to camps in the east. No one knew exactly what happened in those camps, but the rumors were dark. The whispers were terrible. Hannie had seen her friends vanish. She had watched entire neighborhoods emptied overnight. Grief turned to rage. Rage turned to resolve. She met two sisters, Truus and Freddie, over Stiegen. They were even younger than she was. Truus was 16. Freddie was only 14, but they had already killed for the resistance. They had lured Nazi officers into the woods with smiles and soft voices, then shot them dead. They did not boast about it. They did not celebrate. They simply did what needed to be done. Hannie respected that. She understood it. She joined them. Together, the three of them became one of the most effective cells in the Dutch resistance. They specialized in what others could not stomach: assassinations, targeted killings of high-ranking Nazi officials, Dutch collaborators, and Gestapo informants. They studied their targets carefully, learned their routines, waited for the perfect moment. Then they struck, quick, clean, final. Hannie became known for her composure. She never panicked. She never hesitated. When the moment came, she acted. Her red hair became her signature, her identity. Resistance members whispered about the girl with the red hair who walked into danger without flinching. The Germans began to hear the rumors too. They did not know her name yet, but they knew she existed. They knew someone was hunting them. She changed her appearance constantly. She dyed her hair black. She wore different clothes, different glasses, different styles. She became whoever she needed to be. One day she was a secretary, the next a nurse, the next a young woman flirting with soldiers in a bar. She studied their language, their mannerisms, their weaknesses. She smiled at them. She laughed at their jokes. And when the time was right, she disappeared into the night, leaving them dead in alleys, in parks, in empty rooms. The work took a toll. Every mission carried the risk of capture, torture, execution. Every day could be the last. Hannie lived in constant motion, never staying in one place too long, never trusting too easily. She slept in safe houses, in basements, in attics. She ate whatever she could find. She wrote letters to her parents but could not tell them the truth. They knew she was involved in something dangerous, but they did not know how deep she had gone. She thought about morality often. She was not a soldier. She had not been trained for war. She was a law student who believed in justice, in fairness, in the rule of law. And yet here she was, killing people in the shadows. She wondered if she was becoming the very thing she fought against. She wondered if there would be anything left of her when the war finally ended. But then she would remember. She would remember the faces of her friends, dragged from their homes. She would remember the trains leaving for the camps, packed with families who would never return. She would remember the silence of those who did nothing, and she would know that her choice, however terrible, was the right one. The Germans grew more desperate as the war dragged on. The Sicherheitsdienst, the intelligence arm of the SS, intensified their efforts to crush the resistance. They tortured suspects. They executed hostages. They planted spies in every corner of Dutch society. Trust became a luxury no one could afford. Resistance members were arrested every week. Some were shot immediately. Others were sent to concentration camps. A few were never heard from again. Hannie knew the risks. She had seen comrades captured. She had heard the stories of what happened in the interrogation rooms. She had attended funerals in secret, standing in the rain as another fighter was laid to rest. She knew that every mission might be her last, but she kept going. She had come too far to stop now. By 1945, the war was ending. Everyone knew it. The Allied forces were closing in from the west and the east. The Germans were retreating, collapsing, desperate. But in the Netherlands, the occupation remained brutal. The final months were some of the worst. Food became scarce. People starved in the streets. The resistance intensified their operations, trying to hasten liberation, trying to save as many lives as possible before the end. Hannie continued her work. She was exhausted, worn down by years of fear and violence. But she did not stop. She carried illegal newspapers, spreading the truth that the German propaganda tried to suppress. She smuggled weapons. She planned operations. She moved through the city like a ghost, always one step ahead, until March 1945. That was when her luck ran out. She was stopped at a checkpoint. It should have been routine. She had passed through dozens of checkpoints before, always calm, always prepared. But this time, something went wrong. The soldiers were more thorough. They searched her bag. They found the newspapers. They found the weapon. She was arrested immediately. They took her to the headquarters of the Sicherheitsdienst in Haarlem. The building was cold, grey, institutional. Inside its walls, countless resistance fighters had been broken. Some gave up names. Some gave up locations. Some simply gave up. Hannie knew what awaited her. She had heard the stories. She had imagined this moment 1,000 times. Now it was real. The interrogations began immediately. They wanted names. They wanted safe houses. They wanted the entire network. The Sicherheitsdienst had been hunting the girl with the red hair for years. They had heard the whispers. They had found the bodies. They knew she was responsible for dozens of killings. But they did not know who she was, not yet. She had given them a false name. She had stayed calm. She had revealed nothing. They questioned her for hours. The same questions, over and over. Who are you working with? Where are the others? Who gives you orders? She answered with silence or lies. She knew that every hour she held out was another hour for her comrades to disappear, to change locations, to survive. She could endure this. She had endured worse. She told herself that over and over. But the interrogations grew harsher. They did not just ask questions anymore. They used fear. They used pain. They used methods designed to strip away dignity, to break the will, to make resistance impossible. She was beaten. She was deprived of sleep. She was left in darkness for days, then dragged into blinding light. They told her that her friends had already been captured, that her silence was pointless. They told her she would die slowly if she did not cooperate. She did not break. She gave them nothing. Days turned into weeks. The interrogators grew frustrated. They had expected her to crack. Young women always cracked, they believed, but Hannie was not like the others. She had spent years preparing for this moment. She had watched friends die rather than betray the cause. She would do the same. The guards began to recognize her strength. Some respected it quietly. Others hated her for it. She was kept in a cell with little food, little warmth, little hope. Other prisoners whispered to her through the walls. Some were resistance fighters. Some were ordinary people accused of helping Jews or listening to banned radio broadcasts. They shared what little they had. They encouraged each other. They clung to the belief that liberation was coming soon. And it was. The Allies were advancing rapidly. The war was in its final days. Everyone knew it. The Germans knew it. The prisoners knew it. The resistance knew it. Hannie knew it. She could feel it in the air, in the way the guards moved, in the desperation of her interrogators. They were running out of time. So was she. The Sicherheitsdienst made a decision. If they could not break her, they would eliminate her. She was too dangerous to release. She knew too much, even if she had not spoken. She had killed too many of their officers. She had made fools of them for too long. The order was given. Hannie Schaft would be executed. They did not tell her immediately. They let her sit in her cell, listening to the sounds of the prison. She heard footsteps. She heard doors opening and closing. She heard gunshots in the distance. Other prisoners being executed. Other lives ending just before the war did. She knew her turn was coming. She prepared herself. She thought about her parents. She thought about her friends. She thought about the people she had saved, the people she had failed to save. She thought about whether it had all been worth it. On the morning of April 17th, 1945, they came for her. It was early. The sun had not yet fully risen. She was taken from her cell and led outside. She was not given a trial. She was not given a chance to speak. She was simply led to a patch of ground near the dunes outside Haarlem, a place where many before her had been shot. She walked calmly. The guards were surprised by her composure. Most prisoners cried or begged or tried to run. She did none of those things. She had accepted what was coming. She had made peace with it. She stood where they told her to stand. She faced the firing squad without blindfold, without tears. The officer in charge gave the order. A single shot rang out, but the bullet only grazed her head. It did not kill her. She fell to the ground, wounded but conscious. Blood ran down her face. She lay there in the dirt, pain flooding through her body. She could hear the soldiers talking. One of them was young, inexperienced. He had fired poorly. Hannie Schaft, 24 years old, bleeding in the sand, looked up at them. Her voice was steady. Her words were clear. She said, "I shoot better." Then they fired again. This time, they did not miss. Her body was left in a shallow grave, unmarked and forgotten. The Germans did not record her real name. They did not acknowledge what they had done. They buried her quickly and moved on. There were more executions to carry out. There was still a war to lose. 18 days later, on May 5, 1945, the Netherlands was liberated. The German forces surrendered. The occupation was over. People flooded into the streets, crying, laughing, embracing strangers. Flags were raised, songs were sung. After 5 years of darkness, light had returned. But Hannie Schaft was not there to see it. She had died just weeks before the freedom she had fought for. Her parents did not know where she was. Her friends did not know what had happened. She had simply vanished, like so many others. It took months before the truth emerged. After the liberation, the Dutch began the grim work of uncovering what had happened during the occupation. Mass graves were discovered. Execution sites were excavated. Bodies were identified. In one of those graves, near the dunes of Haarlem, they found her. The red hair was still recognizable. The girl who had fooled the SS, who had fought until the very end, was finally given a name again. Her parents buried her with the honors she deserved. The resistance members who had survived came to pay their respects. Truus and Freddie Overstegen stood beside her grave, silent and grieving. They had lost their sister in arms. They had lost one of the bravest people they had ever known. The people of the Netherlands began to learn her story. Newspapers wrote about the girl with the red hair who had terrorized the occupiers. Survivors shared their memories of her courage, her intelligence, her refusal to surrender. She became a symbol of resistance, of the ordinary people who had done extraordinary things. In 1945, her body was moved to the National Honor Cemetery in Bloemendaal, a place reserved for those who had given their lives for the freedom of the Netherlands. She was laid to rest among heroes. Her grave became a site of pilgrimage. People came to leave flowers, to whisper thanks, to remember. But her story did not remain simple. In the years after the war, as Europe divided into East and West, as the Cold War began, Hannie Schaft became a complicated figure. She had been a member of the Communist Party. She had believed in a different vision of society, one that made some uncomfortable in the new political reality. The Dutch government, wary of communist influence, began to downplay her legacy. Her name was spoken less frequently. Her story was taught less often. The hero became inconvenient. For decades, she existed in a kind of limbo. Some remembered her as a martyr. Others tried to forget her entirely. Her communist ties overshadowed her sacrifice in the minds of those who prioritized politics over principle. It was a cruel irony. She had fought for freedom, and in the free society that emerged, her memory was suppressed. But memories are stubborn things. They do not disappear easily. The people who had known her kept her story alive. The resistance members who had fought beside her refused to let her be erased. They spoke at schools. They wrote books. They reminded a new generation that Hannie Schaft had been more than her politics. She had been a human being who saw injustice and chose to fight it, who saw her friends taken and chose to act, who saw evil and chose courage. Slowly, over the years, the tide turned. As the Cold War ended, as old fears faded, the Netherlands began to reclaim her memory. Streets were named after her. Schools bore her name. Memorials were erected. In Haarlem, the city she had defended with her life, a statue was unveiled. It showed her as she had been, young and determined, forever 24, forever watching. Her story was taught in classrooms. Children learned about the girl with the red hair who had fooled the SS. They learned about the price of resistance, the cost of courage. They learned that heroes are not born, they are made, forged in moments of impossible choice. Truus and Freddie Overstegen, who had fought beside her, lived long lives. They too became symbols of the resistance, though they always insisted they had only done what needed to be done. Truus lived until 2016, passing away at the age of 92. Until the end, she spoke about Hannie with reverence and love. She never forgot the girl who had become her sister in the darkest days of the war. The world changed. The war became history. The survivors became fewer. But Hannie Schaft's story endured. Books were written about her. Films were made. Documentaries were produced. Each generation discovered her anew, found something in her story that resonated, that mattered. She represented something fundamental about human nature. She was not a soldier. She was not trained for war. She was simply someone who could not stand by while others suffered. She had been a student with books and dreams, and she became a fighter with weapons and resolve. That transformation, That choice, that willingness to sacrifice everything, spoke to something deeper than politics or ideology. It spoke to the simple truth that sometimes courage is the only moral option. Her story also carried a darker lesson. She had fought for freedom and died just before it arrived. She had given everything and received nothing in return. Her sacrifice was complete, absolute, irreversible. There was no happy ending for Hannie Schaft. There was only the ending that came in the sand on that April morning. And yet, her story was not tragic in the way people often think of tragedy. It was not meaningless. It was not in vain. Every life she saved mattered. Every Nazi officer she eliminated was one less person enforcing terror. Every mission she completed brought liberation one small step closer. She did not live to see freedom, but freedom came because of people like her. The Netherlands was liberated not just by Allied armies, but by the thousands of ordinary citizens who refused to accept occupation, who fought in whatever way they could, who risked everything for a future they might never see. Hannie Schaft was one of thousands. The Dutch resistance was not a single organization, but a network of networks, a web of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. There were workers who sabotaged factories. There were priests who hid Jewish families. There were doctors who treated wounded resistance fighters. There were children who carried messages. There were elderly women who forged documents. There were farmers who sheltered escaped prisoners of war. Every one of them knew the risk. Every one of them chose to act anyway. Many of them died. Their names are recorded on memorials across the Netherlands. Some of them are forgotten entirely, their stories lost to time. But their collective courage changed history. Without the resistance, the occupation would have been easier, the Holocaust more efficient, the liberation more difficult. The small acts of defiance, the individual moments of bravery, they added up. They mattered. Hannie Schaft became the face of that resistance for many people. Her youth made her story accessible. Her courage made it inspiring. Her tragic death made it unforgettable. She was real. She was human. She made mistakes. She felt fear. She questioned herself. She was not a superhero from a comic book or a flawless saint from a legend. She was a young woman who tried her best in impossible circumstances. That is what makes her story powerful. She was not special when she started. She was not chosen by destiny. She simply chose to act when action was needed. She saw a line being crossed and decided she would not cross it. She saw people being hunted and decided she would hunt the hunters. She saw a world of silence and decided she would make noise, even if it cost her everything. In the decades after her death, historians worked to piece together the full story of her life. They interviewed the people who had known her. They examined resistance archives. They traced her missions, her movements, her methods. The picture that emerged was of someone far more complex than the legends suggested. She was not fearless. She was afraid constantly. She did not enjoy violence. She hated it. She did not see herself as a hero. She saw herself as someone doing what needed to be done. Her parents struggled with her legacy. They were proud of her courage, but devastated by her loss. They had raised a daughter who loved books and justice, and they had lost her to a war she had chosen to fight. They kept her letters, her photographs, her memories. They attended ceremonies in her honor, standing quietly while others celebrated the daughter they would never see again. Their grief was private, deep, enduring. The resistance members who survived carried their own burdens. They had done things that haunted them. They had killed people. They had watched friends die. They had made choices that could never be unmade. Some of them struggled with guilt, wondering why they had survived when others had not. Some of them found peace in knowing they had fought for something larger than themselves. All of them carried scars, visible and invisible. Truus Overstegen once said that she and her sister and Hannie had been girls playing at being soldiers. But that was not quite right. They had not been playing. They had been fighting a real war against real evil. They had used real weapons and taken real lives. They had paid a real price. The fact that they were so young made it more remarkable, not less. They had been forced to grow up in ways no one should have to grow up. The question that haunted many people was whether it had been worth it. Hannie Schaft died 18 days before liberation. 18 days. If she had been captured a few weeks later, she might have survived. If the interrogators had taken longer to decide her fate, she might have lived. If the war had ended just a little sooner, she might have seen the freedom she fought for. 18 days. It seemed so cruel, so random, so pointless. But history does not work in hindsight. Hannie Schaft did not know liberation was 18 days away. She knew only that her country was occupied, her friends were being murdered, and she had the ability to fight back. She made the choices she made based on the information she had, the circumstances she faced, the person she was. She could not have known how close the end was. She could only keep fighting until she could not fight anymore. And that is what she did. She fought until the very last moment. Even at her execution, wounded and bleeding, she did not beg. She did not plead. She made a joke about her marksmanship. It was an act of defiance so pure, so fearless, so utterly human that it became the defining moment of her legend. "I shoot better," 3 words that captured everything she had been. Brave, skilled, unbroken. Those words echoed through the decades. They were repeated in books, in films, in classrooms. They became a kind of anthem for the resistance, a reminder that even in the face of death, the human spirit could remain free. The Germans could take her life, but they could not take her dignity. They could execute her, but they could not defeat her. Her grave in Blomendal became a place of reflection. People came from around the world to pay their respects. They left flowers, they left notes. They stood in silence, thinking about what she had done, what she had lost, what she represented. The grave was simple, marked with her name and dates. Nothing more was needed. The story spoke for itself. In modern times, the Netherlands has fully embraced her legacy. She is recognized as a national hero without reservation or qualification. Her communist ties are acknowledged, but no longer seen as a reason to diminish her sacrifice. She fought for freedom. That is what matters. The ideology she believed in is separate from the courage she displayed. History has learned to separate the two. Her story has been told in multiple languages, shared across borders, taught in schools far from the Netherlands. She has become a symbol not just of Dutch resistance, but of resistance everywhere. She represents the idea that ordinary people can stand against extraordinary evil. She represents the belief that one person can make a difference. She represents the truth that courage is a choice, not a birthright. Young women, in particular, find inspiration in her story. She was not a man in uniform. She was not a professional soldier. She was a young woman with intelligence and conviction who refused to be a bystander. In an era when women were expected to be passive, she was active. In a time when women were told to be safe, she chose danger. She proved that heroism has no gender, that courage belongs to anyone willing to claim it. Her story also serves as a warning. It reminds us that evil does not announce itself with fangs and horns. It arrives quietly, with laws and regulations, with small compromises and gradual restrictions. It targets the vulnerable first, the different, the one society is willing to sacrifice. It counts on silence, on obedience, on the willingness of good people to do nothing. Hannie Schaft saw that pattern and refused to accept it. She acted when others did not. The question her story poses to every generation is simple. What would you do? If you lived in an occupied country, if you saw your neighbors being taken away, if you had the opportunity to resist, would you? It is easy to imagine ourselves as heroes when we are safe. It is harder to act when the cost is real, when the danger is immediate, when the choice is between comfort and courage. Hannie Schaft did not have the luxury of imagination. She faced the choice in reality, and she chose courage. Over and over again, she chose courage. She chose it when she left university. She chose it when she joined the resistance. She chose it every time she picked up a weapon. She chose it every time she walked into danger. She chose it when she refused to break under interrogation. She chose it when she faced the firing squad. She chose it until she could choose no more. When liberation finally came, it was too late for Hannie Schaft. But her story became the heartbeat of a nation that refused to bow. She was not there to see the celebrations, to feel the relief, to watch the occupiers leave. But she was present in every moment of freedom that followed. She was present in the lives she saved. She was present in the fear she put in the hearts of those who terrorized her country. She was present in the courage she inspired in others. She was present in the memory that refuses to fade. Her last words echo still. "I shoot better," a joke in the face of death. A refusal to give her killers the satisfaction of seeing her broken. A final act of defiance from a girl who never stopped fighting. Those words are carved into monuments now. They are printed in books. They are spoken in classrooms. They survive because they contain a truth that transcends time and place. Evil can take everything from us. It can take our freedom, our homes, our loved ones, our lives. But it cannot take who we choose to be in the face of it. Hannie Schaft chose to be brave. She chose to be unbreakable. She chose to be free even when freedom seemed impossible. And in doing so, she became immortal. This was Untold Dawn. If history fascinates you, subscribe and join us as we uncover more forgotten truths.